having a strong RevOps leader is the person that can bring together those teams and say, okay, how do we not only get you the tools that you need over in marketing, but we also bridge the gap between marketing and sales so that there aren't gaps in our funnel.
Adam, it's good to see you again.
You too, man. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah?
It's a good day to do a podcast.
It is. It's always a good day to do a podcast.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone, to Thursday morning. We've got another episode of the RevOps Recruiters podcast underway.
That's right.
And our mission here is to provide insights and best practices around finding, hiring, and retaining top revenue operations talent.
And we're your hosts, Adam and David from RevSearch.
You got it. So what are we talking about, Adam?
So we did a podcast just last week that we really dove into this evaluation process for thinking about RevOps, right? And we broke that down based on a system, technology, data, processes, and people. We went real high level because we wanted to keep it kind of short. So today what I think we should do is dive into one of those, the technology piece, and really provide a set of questions, kind of a matrix that an organization could use to evaluate their readiness on RevOps as it relates to technology. So that's what we're going to hop into today.
Perfect. Well, we should get right into it. So the first thing we want to look at is the technology roadmap. And we start off with just a question here. Do you have a high-level summary mapping out the vision and plans for your go-to-market technology that you regularly, and this is important, visit, execute, and revise as needed? Help me unpack that.
Yeah, so I think the roadmap is a tool, right? Yeah. We need that in place in order to be able to execute a lot of the different things we're going to talk about later on in this conversation. But it begins with really defining what the vision and the objectives are. And we're speaking specifically to the go-to-market function of an organization. So what are the vision and objectives of the go-to-market function? And where are we trying to go? What does our sales team look like? What does our marketing team look like? What does customer success look like within our business? And then the next thing we move into is really the current state, right? Assessing where we are today. What do we have in place? Where are the potholes? Where are the challenges? Where are the speed bumps? What do those look like? And being honest about that and assessing what do we look like? And then what could technology look like if we were to bring that in to help us get better at our go-to-market functions, right? So that's kind of the next step of that process.
Yeah. Yeah. The key word that I always hear tossed around is funnel gap analysis.
Yeah.
So looking at it top to bottom, figuring out what are our handoffs look like? What are our stages look like? How is everything set up, and are there any gaps?
It's so good because we say this over and over and over, but RevOps is supposed to be about that whole funnel, the entire thing. And so looking for the gaps, particularly as it relates from one team to the next across the entire go-to-market function. Yeah. Then the next thing is if I'm thinking about technology, we have to constantly be looking at trends and advancements. So if I'm building a roadmap, there's very likely pieces of technology that I thought about years ago that today aren't as relevant as they might have been years ago because there's better technology that's come along. And so this roadmap is very organic. It's constantly growing, evolving, changing. And you've got to be evaluating those trends and those advancements. What are the new things that are available to us? Then once you've decided on some tools and technologies that you're going to implement, you've got to set out what are those milestones? How are we going to get this from conceptualized from an idea on a piece of paper into something that's now actionable and usable by our team? So what does this timeline look like? With that comes the resources involved, right? So I'm going to need money. I'm going to need budget for licensing. I'm going to potentially need budget for outside resources to help with the implementation process. Who are the internal resources that we're going to deploy on this? Do I have a RevOps person right now that can help with this? Are we going to have some kind of shared effort here? But what are those internal and external personnel that we're going to need? And what are the overall resources that I'm going to need in order to deploy this roadmap that I've got in front of me?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really, I think about our business, and I think about some of these things that you just listed out and how we've talked about those, right? You look at a piece of technology and, you look at the whole roadmap and you figure out how does that fit into this whole roadmap? And is it, you do that analysis of, risk analysis, how much change, how much impact is this going to have, weigh it back to the overall roadmap. And so really understanding and doing a lot of good planning and communication, which goes into the next point, stakeholder engagement, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
And you've got to, the reality is when you're rolling out technology, if I'm on the RevOps team or I'm operationally minded, it's great if I feel that it's important, but if I don't get the stakeholders engaged in that as well, it's very likely going to fall flat. So I've got to have a plan on how do I get the various stakeholders across these different go-to-market teams involved so that they have buy-in. They're going to be my champions. I've got to have them involved in that process. Yeah. And then the final thing is, we've already kind of alluded to it, but this technology roadmap, it is not a static sheet of paper that never changes, a tool that never that we never revisit. You've got to come back to it, you've got to review it, and you've got to be constantly iterating it, thinking about what are our needs today, and they're very likely different from what my needs were 6 months ago, a year ago, 3 years ago. So constantly iterating that. And that's really the technology roadmap.
Yeah, great. Well, next we want to talk about the centralized CRM. And the question that we pose to, companies out there is your CRM the central source of truth? Meaning all your critical data is captured and up to date at any given time within your CRM.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I think about here is, do you even have a CRM? And I know many of the companies that we're talking to, they've already crossed that gate. But surprisingly, we've talked to companies that have reached, there's $20 million companies, and they're still saying, well, we don't really have a centralized CRM yet. That's a huge part of the RevOps function, right? And the value of a CRM. So I think about, I've worked with organizations in the past where they were utilizing a proprietary system that said it, proprietary to an organization or to a segment. It said it was a CRM, but the problem was that it wasn't flexible and it wasn't customizable. And so it only worked within within that organization as long as that organization fit exactly what the developers of that particular technology thought was important. The moment that it deviated from that, it was no longer useful, right? Because we weren't able to make it flexible and customizable for that organization. So the importance, first of all, is saying we do have a centralized CRM. Oftentimes it's Salesforce, it's HubSpot, maybe occasionally Microsoft Dynamics. Pipedrive, yeah. There's a number of those, but is it flexible and is it customizable for you? That's the first question. But what this allows you to have is it now gives you a place to retain the information that you learn about your customers, about the people that you're interacting with, and it gives every part of the go-to-market function, marketing, sales, customer success, it gives them a better view, a better comprehensive understanding of their customer because the data's there, the information's there, and it allows you to be flexible to add new data points as needed as your company and your needs across the go-to-market function change. So you can capture more information. It's so important that you have that comprehensive view. You understand your customer.
Yeah, and it enables you to serve your customer better, right? It makes the customer, you can now make your customer journey better. You can be more efficient, right? You can meet the consumer at a faster pace.
Sure.
So efficiency goes up, and time spent on certain activities goes down. I think about it, you were talking earlier about companies that may not have a CRM. There's such a huge win by just going from, disparate spreadsheets to a CRM. I feel like the amount of win that you have for those customers is huge.
For sure.
But then once you get into your system and you start to have that baseline, it becomes more granular. And so, I feel like the wins are massive when you shift to a centralized CRM. You start to have that whole view. You begin to have that whole view. But then over time, as the organization scales, you really dial into more of those granular data points, right?
Sure.
And moving more towards predictability, where you need some more of that flexibility and customizability.
Yeah, and a lot of that also comes to the reason we want to do that is that you hear people talking about aligning marketing, sales, customer success. Part of the alignment of all that is just understanding the customer throughout all stages and having the ability to track the data across all that. So having a CRM really allows you, it's not the final alignment, but it's a step towards aligning marketing, sales, customer success. Everybody's using the same tool, has access to the same data. the same understanding. You begin to recognize patterns and consistencies about certain segments of your customer base and even your customer base as a whole. So you want to align all those things. And then finally, the last thing that I'd say about this, and you mentioned this already, was just the scalability and the growth that you can gain with a tool like this that can go with or is with you for where you are today, but go with you where you're going tomorrow and beyond.
Yeah.
And you need that tool like that. So really evaluating, where are you in your journey of a CRM, and do you have that as the central nervous system, the central hub of your overall technology stack?
Yeah, no, that's great. Then we don't want to talk about technology integration. And this is where we ask the question, are all your additional go-to-market technology tools integrated with your CRM so there's no need to manually move data between systems? So let's talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, as your organization grows, there is going to be a need for technology that has more advanced feature sets than what just the base CRM has.
Yeah.
We see this all the time. There's different sequencing tools, there's different data enrichment tools, there's different whatever it is that your go-to-market team needs, and those new technologies offer more functionality than what just Salesforce or just HubSpot has. But in the integration of that, the last thing you want to do is to speed up the accuracy of information inside those tools, but then decrease the accuracy of information inside the CRM because they're not talking to each other. So if I'm on the sales team, but marketing is using a totally different piece of technology in which I don't have any visibility, or someone over on marketing is having to manually move data between two different systems, it increases the likelihood that it doesn't get moved, or the likelihood of errors, or just overall workload. And so I'm looking for, how can I integrate all of my technology together so that they're synchronizing data across all these systems? Bidirectional feeds of data. I remember, we did talking about how we tie this into finding talent on the RevOps side. There's a company that we worked with, and they specifically said, we need someone who can come in and join our RevOps team. This is one of 5 roles that we're going to have, where this person is going to focus on specifically building integrations between our technology stack that don't exist with these one-click integration tools that we can get from an app marketplace. There's bidirectional syncs that we need to happen that don't happen automatically. We want to build that because we see the value of having that integration happen automatically and not manually. Yeah. And so that's what building out that team might look like. Technology integration also allows you to have increased and enhanced functionality. Again, we kind of alluded to it, but you are likely going to outgrow the functionality of the CRM. That doesn't mean the CRM goes away, still that hub, but you have tools that can do some functions better than just how the base CRM does it. And so having technology integration allows you to have increased functionality, but again, you don't want to carry the debt of now having to move data back and forth between those two. And then ultimately, we just want to save time, right? We want to reduce workload, reduce the ability for there to be potential errors, or even worst case scenario, the data doesn't even get moved between the two. So that integration is so important.
And the RevOps leader is so important when it comes to this integration piece, because you're constantly having to weigh, okay, we want to keep it simple, but yet we want some of this functionality over here. This tool provides X, this tool provides Y, and this could really be helpful for our sellers. This could be really helpful for our marketing folks. But the reality is, you have to have someone who puts on that hat of architect, who thinks through, how can we maintain our agility, right? And not just bloat the stack, not just buy a bunch of tools because they can give us this functionality, but constantly weighing it back to, is the customer journey still seamless? Is it still efficient, right? Constantly going back and forth and saying, what is best for the business right now? What do we need down the road? And just playing that dance, doing that dance of weighing technology to maintain that lean, right? That lean process.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think what I'd add to that is that each one of these go-to-market teams, marketing, sales, customer success, they are looking specifically at their own function. And it's not that they're saying that somebody else's function doesn't matter, but their job is to ensure that they're doing the marketing side of it correctly, or the sales side or the customer success side correctly. And so oftentimes they're a little more focused on just their own needs. Having a strong RevOps leader is the person that can bring together those teams and say, okay, how do we not only get you the tools that you need over in marketing, but we also bridge the gap between marketing and sales so that there is that, there aren't gaps in our funnel. It's seamless and it's clean. And so, that RevOps person really takes a step back and should be looking at it holistically.
Yeah. Next, we have adoption. So this is where we ask the question, is the adoption of your CRM and other prescribed technologies widespread and utilized on a daily basis across your entire go-to-market team? Man,
so good, man.
This is important.
How many times, I'm sure there's folks listening to this that would say, man, there are times that I figured out the perfect solution. Yeah. I've got the tool that's going to work. I know it's going to bring efficiencies. We're going to get better. And yet nobody uses it, right? There's no adoption. Yeah. Nobody, I heard a consultant say to us one time in our business, they said, what is your primary system? And we describe, it's Salesforce because it has this and that. And I said, no. Your primary system is the system that your people are using. So are they using Salesforce? Kinda. Okay, what else are they using? Well, they're really using, and we listed off, okay, they said, that's your system. That's the system that's being used. Yeah. Now, if you want them to use Salesforce, then we need to talk about adoption, right? So adoption looks like this, a couple of things. Well, number one, you are not going to drive adoption if you don't have buy-in from the stakeholders of these teams. Yeah. I mean, you've got to identify, it goes back to that the technology roadmap, identifying stakeholders. You got to identify it here as well to get adoption and buy-in. Who are those folks? And many times it's the leaders. You need the leaders, but there may even be team members that aren't the team lead, but they're so bought in. Use them as champions. Identify those folks, bring them into the process. Communicate the benefits of this, of utilizing the technology, the CRM, the other pieces of technology. Communicate the benefits. We know this. It's not because we hate other people that we do this, but we're so ingrained as individuals to say, what's the benefit for me? Yeah. That it's so important that you identify the benefit for the individual that you're communicating it to. You don't want to tell them, hey, can you do this because it helps me do my job? I'm not saying that the person doesn't want you to do your job, but it's much better to communicate to them, if you do this, it will help you close more deals, have better insights, higher quality conversations, whatever the benefit is, right? Help it, paint it for them as an individual. Involve those stakeholders in the process. Don't just top down dictate, this is what you're going to do, but involve them in the process. Help them make it their, heck, if you can make it their decision and not yours, even better, because they're going to own it so much more. Yeah.
I think about the facilitator, right? You're not necessarily the driver out front that has the perfect plan yet, but you're coming alongside the organization. So often that's what we hear is we don't want somebody to just take over and do their plan. We want somebody to come alongside us and show us the value, show us the benefits, right? The bigger picture, the roadmap in alignment with the go-to-market strategy, but on a more granular level, if it's a tool, make sure you focus on that ROI, right? Make sure you focus on the benefits, like you mentioned. I think that, if you can sell me as the business leader on this and show me the long-term value and how it's going to ultimately optimize things, that's the key. That's the key is return on investment for every business leader.
Yeah. So you want to foster a culture of innovation. So when you involve these other leaders in the process, it shows them that their opinions matter, their voice is heard, and they're more likely to bring more ideas to the table and generating more ideas. Maybe not every one of them is one that you implement, but there's always something good in listening to the voice of the people that we're trying to empower through these tools and technology. Mm-hmm. There's going to be something that's going to come out of that. So you want to just foster that culture of innovation. Then I think this is another place that just adoption can fall flat, is on the training and support side. So you do all, if you're a RevOps leader or you're operationally minded and you're building out these tools, and then you send out one email and a list of credentials to the team and say, hey, go make this thing work, right? It's going to fall flat. You've got to provide the training. You've got to provide the documentation. You've got to bring them into meetings. You've got to, really get adoption across the entire team. And that looks like just spending time with that team and providing that support. When they have questions, when they push back a little bit, you shouldn't be afraid of that. You should be able to say, okay, there's pushback here. Let me find out why. There may be an actual validity to the issue that they're bringing up. I remember so many times when I was working as a RevOps person inside of an organization, I'd build this thing and everything looked perfect. I tested it, but then I didn't realize when you actually went outside of the four walls of our building and you got out into the field and you're dealing with a cellular connection, some of these things didn't work. And so the more I listened to the feedback of those that were out there using it, the better I could make that tool for them and the greater the adoption was. So you just got to be constantly offering training, offering support, accepting feedback, being willing to iterate and change things. You can't see it as your baby that's perfect, I've made this thing so fantastic. How could you ever question what I've given you, right? But you got to listen and be able to take that feedback and iterate on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about it this way. If I'm the person that's supposed to do extra steps to get data into the system, how does that benefit me in the long run? And so you're constantly thinking about the other person, the other people that are impacted, right? And I think that's where that enablement piece, like you mentioned, enablement, training, that is such a big part of this. Otherwise, adoption, it just falls flat, like you said. All right, great. Then we want to talk about lean versus bloated tech stack. So we have the question, are you consistently evaluating the tools within your tech stack to optimize usefulness and adoption while reducing tech costs and redundancies? I mean, we see this all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's almost inevitable, right? So as organizations grow, different leaders across different teams of the go-to-market function realize that they need tools. Maybe there's not a centralized RevOps team in place yet, so they each one begin to go and acquire different tools that their teams need. And pretty soon you find yourself a little bit down the journey, and all of a sudden you're thinking, holy cow, we've got 20, 30 different pieces of technology that's being utilized across our entire go-to-market function. And kind of the way you combat that is you're just doing regular evaluations of the overall tech stack. So you're looking at, what do we have? How is it still useful? Is it still relevant to where we are today? And just constantly looking at that, at those different systems. And really, you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, but you should be looking at, how does our tech stack make the internal customer, so the marketing team, the sales team, customer, how does it make their life better? How do I keep it simple for them? I don't want it so cumbersome and challenging that either it slows them down, it doesn't really make them any better, or they just say, you know what, I'm not even going to do it. There's no point to it, right? So how are you building this in a way, this tech stack, and keeping it lean enough that it's actually making the lives of those individuals better? Here's another big one is, know your renewal cycles. All these technologies are going to be on some kind of renewal cycle. If you know what that renewal cycle is, you've got two benefits. The first one is, you determine that technology isn't really what you need for the long run and you need to sunset it. Well, you need a plan to really get every piece of data, every piece of functionality out of that system. And you want to do it before the end of your renewal cycle, because otherwise you're going to end up saying, we know we don't need this piece of technology, but I still got to buy X number of licenses for another period of time because I'm not ready to sunset it yet, right? So if you know that renewal cycle is coming up, you can evaluate it early and decide whether it still works for you. Or the flip side is, if you know the renewal cycle and you still think that this piece of technology is super useful, you can look at what are the renewal cycles that I can take advantage of and potentially up a little sooner at a time where that company might offer you better pricing because they're up against a fiscal calendar year end, they're up against a quarterly end. Oftentimes, if I go into buying technology and I know that their fiscal year ends at the end of November, I can get a much better deal if I sign that contract 2 days before the end of their fiscal year than 2 days after the end of the beginning of their fiscal year. And so knowing that renewal cycle allows you to just really negotiate your overall pricing.
Yeah. So often I talk to candidates and, we talk about some of the experiences and some of these different roles they've been in. And the keyword technical debt comes up so often, which is, the result of a bloated tech stack is you may think you're getting really, really awesome tools, and you might not even have governance around this. You might have, individual people buying tech and you don't even know about it, right? You get into that sort of situation, but it eventually causes that decrease in efficiency, and it's harder to undo some of these things.
Sure.
Once they've run their course, right? Once you've kind of, there's a compound effect of we've got all these different tools, not really talking to each other. They're all creating data sets, right? There's tons of data all over the place. Now we have to go in and we got to figure out how do we sift through all this. And so keeping a lean stack enables you to avoid that debt.
Yeah, I mean, we deal with this, and we're a much smaller company. I can't imagine if we had hundreds of users,
my goodness,
how you keep up with all that. So you've got to have an intentional plan. And I guess the last thing that I would say around the lean versus bloated would be anytime you bring on a new piece of technology, look at all the functionality and all the what it can provide. And is it redundant to anything that you have? And there may be a piece of technology that you have currently that you've had around for a little bit that you could sunset, that you could walk away from because this new technology does that plus so much more. So anytime you bring on a new piece of technology, think about, does this replace anything that we currently have? And if so, how do we undo that? How do we migrate the data, train the folks, onboard them so that we can walk away from that old piece of technology that doesn't work for us quite as well anymore?
Yeah. Adam, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd say, to folks out there, again, if your organization is looking at trying to understand your readiness for RevOps, right? If you're trying to say, okay, where do we sit on the spectrum? These 5 questions are questions you should ask yourselves and grade yourselves. Give yourself a scale of 1 to 10, right? Where do we sit on this? And based on that, help you understand where you could bring in someone to really help you grow in a particular area. I mean, I just think about the amount of accuracy and clarity you could give to a candidate of exactly what your needs are if you took the time to work through these questions would be huge, and it would allow you to really hone in on the right type of candidate that you're looking for. So hopefully folks will find these 5 questions as something useful as they are evaluating their technology.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the RevOps Recruiters podcast. If you found the information in this episode helpful, please consider subscribing. You can do that on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, if you have comments or suggestions for future podcasts, we'd love to hear them. Please put those in the comments section on YouTube. Finally, if you're looking to hire your first or next RevOps leader, we'd love to help. You can connect with us through our website at www.revsearch.io. Thanks again for listening.